Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jaya Kula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are.
Could you talk about humble bragging?
Well, we can just think of humble bragging as one of the main tool sets for self-branding, creating a brand for yourself. Unfortunately, when we used to say I'm humbled by something, it means something went wrong, put me in my place. Like I tried my hardest, but the thing didn't work out, and now I feel humbled by it. I've got a more realistic view of myself. The humbling was kind of a knockdown previously. And if someone was humble, if you said somebody was humble, and maybe this still kind of means that, it meant that they weren't full of themselves. They were sort of simple and just kind of going along and not making too much of a fuss out of themselves. Of course, now we say, I feel humbled when we've been admired and rewarded by others. How that is humbling, I do not know. But I've noticed that it's kind of ubiquitous now. Like it started out as just something people in spiritually bypassy realms use that phraseology. But now it just seems like everybody is saying it. Anyway, to say you're humbled now, I'm not even sure what anyone is saying when they say that. Then there's just general humble bragging, which is when you say something that sounds self-effacing, but you're really saying, I want you to have a high opinion of me. So one time, somebody I know, who shall remain unnamed, he went to the bodega, it's like a little grocery store near his house. He came back and he said to me, I don't know what happened, but the person behind the counter at the bodega called me Sifu. Why would they do that? Why would they call me Sifu? Sifu means like respected teacher in Taoist traditions. So that's a humble brag. Like, oh, even somebody at the bodega knows I'm a Sifu. Something you do that's self-effacing, but isn't. And then you draw attention to how humble you are, but when actually it's a bid for admiration. So it's part of a brand. Like humble bragging is part of a self-branding, self-fashioning move. If I said to you, this past week I did 40,000 mantras, but that's nothing compared to the ancients. That's a brand. I just want you to know I did a lot of mantra and I'm a great practitioner. But I do it in the guise of some sort of folk,
I'm thinking about times when I've basically lied, like downplaying the experience that I'm sharing. Is that humble bragging? Like saying I'm confused or unsure when I did actually have clarity, I just didn't really want it.
That's not humble bragging, no. But it is self-fashioning. Humble bragging is only one of our many tools. It's not the only tool. Saying we're confused is a culturally learned way of avoiding criticism. So being confused in a moment or in general, if one is constantly saying one's confused and maybe even actually feeling confused in the end, not able to identify your own clarity, that can happen too. It's a way of not taking responsibility for who you are and what you actually think or want or don't want. And it's also a way of avoiding criticism or violence. There's certain circumstances in which our clarity becomes dangerous. Or we might even risk some sort of loss through being clear. And it's not necessarily always the other person who's at fault. It could be that we're in, for instance, a relationship and we know it's not working, but we manufacture a bunch of confusion because we're afraid to not be in that relationship even though it's not working. So that can just be something we're doing internally to block ourselves making a necessary move. But when we're in a typical conversation with others and we feign confusion, it's usually either because we don't want to have to be responsible for our clarity, or we have some sort of fear that our clarity is going to be criticized or even severely rebuked or create some sort of angry flashing back. And this is particularly an experience of women and other people who have been oppressed and marginalized, to feign confusion or to say, I don't know, when you really do know, in the face of someone who isn't going to either understand what you're talking about, won't respect what you're talking about, will give you pushback of all kinds of varieties, or might even get violent. It's a survival strategy that becomes kind of endemic, and then we can't stop doing it.
Could you populate this verbal landscape for me around confusion? Because I know that any time that we're acting in a way that is not supporting us or other people on the path to waking up, that's a result of a lack of clarity.
Well, just to be clear, I was speaking to that specific case when he says he's confused, but he knows he's not. Right. But of course, we all have lack of clarity until we are God. We're always going to have some degree of lack of clarity, no matter what, because full clarity is just self-realization of some extraordinary degree, and nobody in the human realm ever has that degree of clarity, although we can have lots more clarity through doing practice than we have in general. So lack of clarity is built in. We could just call that lack of access to wisdom. It's just our condition, and we should not get too exercised about that. But there's a lot of things we can do to help to, in an ordinary sense, if we think about our sadhana, the base of our sadhana is taking care of our body and our mind in an ordinary way. Ma said this over and over and over again. Take care of your body so you can do sadhana. That was one of her main teachings. And it was an interesting teaching because she was in a culture that in general had a lot of denigration of bodies happening and admonishments not to bother with your body or pay much attention to it. And there's also the other swath of Ayurveda and body culture that was very healthy. But in any case, she really said this over and over again. So even though we have built into us a lack of clarity, aka lack of access to wisdom, we want to take care of ourselves in an ordinary way to establish a baseline and find out how much clarity we have when we are functioning better in an ordinary sense. So that means eating properly for your constitution, taking whatever steps towards self-care or professional medical care you need to take, trying to be in an environment that is supportive for your body, energy, and mind, getting appropriate sleep, getting appropriate movement. All of those things are going to increase your clarity. Absolutely are going to. It's not going to solve your whole problem of lack of clarity, but it's going to be the first and the most fundamental way that we increase our clarity. And those ways of taking care of ourselves, having right livelihood, living in as healthy an environment as we possibly can, all of these things are going to help our sadhana and give us more result in our sadhana so that we can have more clarity. And what does clarity actually mean? It means seeing what's really happening. So for instance, if you meet somebody, you have a certain amount of clarity that you are perceiving that person with. And maybe you're not perceiving much. I like to tell this funny story about when I was in grad school at Stanford and there was a new professor. He was quite young. And I mentioned to him something about when someone comes in a room and you can just tell that they're sad. He was like, what? No, that's not a thing. You can't do that. You never know what's happening with somebody else. And I was like, really? What world does this person live in? What does it feel like to be this person? They can't tell anything about how other people are feeling. That's like living in some sort of cardboard cutout world. So there's a huge range of human beings and what we're able to perceive. From fairly dysfunctional, like this professor expressed, to sort of broad average range of being able to discern what's happening around you and discern what's happening with yourself and other people. Then there's people who have more capacity for discerning, and even some people that we think have extraordinary capacity, like people we call psychics, or people that we think are more realized. The difference between all of those people is how much perceptual clarity you have. So when we do sadhana, we're increasing our perceptual clarity, and when we take care of our bodies and our environment, we are increasing our perceptual clarity. And all of this has to do with relaxing the things that are obstructing our clarity. That's what we're doing. But don't get too exercised about it. Just take steps that you can take in a practical way. Remember, we're all given a certain condition. We all arrive in a certain condition, and then our condition changes over time, and things happen. And that's just what we have to work with. That's our material to work with, and we're each unique in that sense. We each have different configurations, and we should have a practical and friendly feeling toward that, even if our circumstances are very difficult. Just get to work with what we've got.
I was just wondering if you could talk about having a goal for our practice or our sadhana. Feels contradictory to how I approach practice, like making it about some kind of goal and trying to get to some place.
It's important to have longing. It's important to feel yearning. That's really the fuel that is driving everything. It's important to feel desire. To be relieved of your limitations, in a general sense. But to have specific goals, like I want to take a light body, or I want to have no thoughts, or I want this or I want that, no, absolutely not. Those are all obstructions. So we have to have longing. It can just be a longing to be closer to that which we only have a partial understanding and experience of. For me, it was always, I just want to know what's happening here. And I want to be able to participate more in whatever that is. I don't want to be locked out or benched. But those are not specific things. I didn't know what that really would look like. I didn't have any real picture of what that would be in the end. And that is our real condition always, is that whatever you imagine the goal is, you're imagining from where you're sitting. Wherever you are now, with all your limitations, you think feeling Kundalini rising is the goal, or light body is the goal, or having certain powers is the goal, or being equanimous is the goal, or no thoughts is the goal. Whatever you think the goal is, that's the goal from where you're sitting right now with all your limitations. So it's best to not have those kind of goals, because in my experience, nothing that was important in my practice was ever anything that any of my teachers described. I was utterly surprised at every point. So it's best to just have your longing and let that lead you, but then let God do the rest and show you what's really happening. We are actually being in and being part of this vast intelligence. The idea that we would tell that what the goal is just kind of hilarious, actually. But some people need to have a measure. So there's students and teachers who just need to have a measure because they need to succeed at spiritual things. And that, of course, is another obstacle. The problem if we have these very specific goals or something we're pursuing is we might get that thing. And then we think we've arrived when we haven't. There's lots of descriptions of what self-realization is or what enlightenment is that are really only very partial, part the way there. So if we've got ourselves convinced that it's this or that, and we actually achieve this or that, we might get stuck for a bunch of lifetimes before we realize, no, it wasn't really that. That's just part of the way. But in the end, none of this actually matters. Because all of this is very individualistic, dualistic based. This idea that I'm going to achieve something for the greater glory of me. Anything along those lines is not what these kinds of traditions are about. Those are very dualistic points of view.
I'm wondering if you could say a bit about how one's environment can either facilitate or be an obstacle to sadhana. I just came back from spending a week in nature, and I found that to be very helpful for my spiritual practice. And now that when I'm back in DC, my spiritual practice just wanes because of the environment I'm in. There's a lot of stress. But then I'm also thinking, am I putting too much emphasis on my environment? And should I somehow be able to sustain my spiritual practice on my own?
It doesn't matter what you should be able to do. It only matters what you are able to do. Please listen to this. There's no standard out there that you have to live to prove that you're a valuable person. We have to just look at how things are and then respond to that. You said you get back to DC and things are so stressed. There's a kind of good rule of thumb, which is try to live in circumstances that you can digest and that aren't digesting you. So when we're in a circumstance where we let go of things that we most value because we're stressed and distracted and running a treadmill, we're being digested by that circumstance. You owe it to yourself to live the life you want to live, if you can. Not everybody can, but if you have the wherewithal, mentally, emotionally, karmically, and financially, you have the privilege of being able to live as you want to support who you actually are. So there's zero reason other than the fact that you're living to somebody else's standard, not your own, that you should be living in a circumstance that you find so stressful that you can't do your practice. There's just no reason for you to be doing that other than you've internalized this inner critic and you think someone's out there measuring you. Most of the time they're not. They're just so self-involved, no one's measuring you. But even if they are, I don't know, fuck them. You should live in a way that is nourishing to you. Why not? This is your life, actually. One thing about people in academia, because I used to be in academia and I know you're still in academia, there's such an atmosphere of fear and loathing, and everyone's always putting off their happiness for some future date. You could get hit by a truck tomorrow. But please remember, this is actually your life, the one you're in right now. The future is unknowable. It might not even happen the way you think. The gift has been given to you of being able to make certain choices. And you can't do any better in a human life than live to your actual values and try to be a benefit to others by doing that. You're not being a benefit to anybody running around trying to prove yourself and being all stressed out. That is not helping anyone. And think about your research and the papers that you're going to write versus you being more relaxed and more giving, more loving, and more nourishing to others. Which is more valuable? The next conference paper or the next time you're really able to show someone love and respect and compassion and help them? Ding, 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 ding. Live your life. Don't live other people's lives. Please. Do me a favor.
Could you talk a bit about nourishment as well?
Well, ultimately everything is nourishing, but we don't know that, so we have to make choices. There are some commonalities in life that are nourishing. Eating decent food and having a decent place to live and having a way to make money that doesn't destroy you and having loving friends, and all that is very nourishing. But then there's other things that relate to our unique dimension that are more important or less important to different people. I love it when I walk into a space or into my own apartment and everything feels spacious and there's a sense of order and cleanliness and beauty and texture, and it smells good. That's very important to me, that things smell good in spaces. That's not so important to other people, but I find that very nourishing. So you just have to figure out what's nourishing for you. And again, don't live by shoulds. Just live by what is. That's part of the courage, and just having the courage to live by what is right for you, even if it's not in sync with what other people are doing or expect of me. I've rarely done what anyone expected of me, especially in the first part of my life. I was just a failure at meeting other people's expectations. And I took a lot of flack for it, and it was painful. But somehow I always knew that there was no other way to be, that I just couldn't live this life without just doing my thing. So that's really kind of what I feel is the most important thing that I teach, is to just be yourself. Find out what is best for you, nourishing for you, what you really want to express, what you really value, and live for that. Have no brand. Brands are always for others. Brands reflect other people's expectations, their cultural expectations, society's expectations. So much effort for nothing. So much effort worrying about what other people think of us. Incredible amount of work. And it's unpaid work. Although sometimes this actually is paid work. I think that back. Satsang with Shambhavi is produced by Jaya Kula, a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. If you enjoyed listening, please help us keep this podcast and many other teachings open to all by making a monthly or one-time donation. Visit jayakula.org to make a donation and explore more of our offerings.